kind of want to. I kind of talked about it. I made a tweet about it recently, and it's kind of hashing up an old discussion, but it does come part and parcel with running a game, and that is like preparation.
Yeah.
People know I'm a low to zero prep guy. Wasn't always that way, but I do think that people, I think, sometimes see me talk about it, even though I've said this a million times. I'm not against prep. I've said multiple times on videos and streams that it's going to vary from game system to game system. For instance, I always use the example of Call of Cthulhu, which I really love. And actually, right here, this is one of my old notebooks from a while ago that has like all my notes from like an old Call of Cthulhu campaign that I ran. And, it was very heavy prep, extremely heavy prep. Like, let me see if I can get to what details I got into here. Like I had like glyphs, and I made like fake newspaper articles as like an artifact in and this was like, man, this game was probably almost 10 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that though. That sounds actually fun, but
it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I was a kid at the time, so I had a lot more time to do this kind of stuff. But I'm not against prep. And then actually on the back here, it has a bunch of notes from like an old 5e campaign that I ran for a long time here. That's just, it's just pages, gobs of pages and sketches of like my notes from this game from like almost a decade ago.
Yeah.
Like really simple dungeon maps and stuff that I drew out. So I'm not against it. It just all depends.
Yeah.
I don't know where I'm going with that. Just I shared a tweet today though, like from Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, where Gary kind of talks about see if I can find it. Where Gary kind of talks about how like it's fine to wing it, but don't try and do that from the outset, This is page 7, I think. Improvisation might be fine later, but until you are completely relaxed as the DM, don't run the risk of trying to wing it unless absolutely necessary. Set up the hamlet or village where the action will commence, and the player characters entering and interacting with the local population. Place regular people, some different and unusual types, and a few non-player characters in various dwellings and places of business. Note vital information particular to each. Stock the goods available to the players. When they arrive, you will be ready to take on the persona of the settlement as a whole, as well as that of each individual therein.
Yeah.
So, and in the whole point being like at the prep side, that prep is okay. I'm not against it as much as people want to like strawman me about it. And maybe I haven't at the beginning. I didn't do as good of a job communicating it. I assumed people were maybe a little smarter than they actually are.
Your first mistake.
It's my first mistake. But like I think that we all probably learned and get joy out of like oh, this is cool. Like I'm going to build my own setting and world. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? I'm rambling now. So.
No, I'm definitely a world builder, a realm weaver, or whatever. But I do it all in my head. Like I don't really like taking notes. I don't like setting up like whole folders of like NPCs and stuff. I just keep it all in like this weird convoluted Rolodex in my head. Which if I ever get Alzheimer's or something, I'm gonna be screwed. But knock on wood. Yeah, no, I'm probably like low to medium prep, but my prep is more like, hey, like I have like this. They might go to this dungeon or they might end up in this area, so I'm gonna like scour Google for like really cool battle maps or like stuff like that.
Sure,
it's never really like writing down NPCs and like doing all this stuff. That's also why I like running modules, because modules, they basically do all the prep for you beforehand. And even then, people always suggest like, oh, you have to read the module at least like 2 times before you run it. I don't read that shit. I just read it as I'm running it, basically. And then that also creates like a lot of randomness because I'll mess stuff up. I haven't read far enough, so I missed something or I just forgot something, and I just kind of like wing stuff. But players are none the wiser. So
Yeah, we got a super chat here. Thank you, Mercurius. You're always super generous. Thank you for your $2 Australian. Just a couple of pennies for the guy, straw man. So
thank you.
thank you. Yeah, I like to. I'm kind of like that too, where I have a lot of stuff in my head. Um, as I sit throughout the day, or as I watch a movie, sometimes like I watch a movie or I'm reading a book, and I'm
Yeah,
like, oh, that's really cool.
yeah, exactly.
Like I think I was reading the Aeneid recently, and one cool thing about the Aeneid, and I want to apply this to one of my dungeons or something like that. It's like an entrance into the dungeon
Hmm.
or an obstacle, is to have it like this cursed place, maybe an entrance into the underworld. Who knows? But when I was reading the Aeneid, there's this part where he talks about where in the story where they need to summon the shade of Achilles, I think, and so they sacrifice some goats and other bread and oil and wine and stuff like that, some beverages on this altar, and like the shades of the dead kind of come out of the ground and they start like licking up the blood and all
Yeah,
the food and stuff. And I was thinking like it wasn't an entrance into anything. And then the shade of Achilles comes out or whatever. And I was thinking about it, I'm like, oh man, that would like really set the tone for the entrance into a dungeon. Like you got
yeah.
to sacrifice something to get into it, first of all,
Hmm.
and then this creepy stuff happens, you know. And then this is also going to cause some tension, maybe like if the cleric is extremely devout and this is like a sacrifice to the dead, this might be theologically a
Yeah,
problem for like the cleric or the paladin or something like that. So you instantly set up like a lot of interesting stuff, you
yeah.
know. Um
Well,
and,
I think you kind of. Oh, sorry, God, if you
well,
if
I
you
was gonna
want
say
to.
like, but I
Yeah.
don't write that stuff down. Like that's just
No,
in my
exactly.
head, and it's just
Yeah,
sort of like I read that, file that away,
yeah.
bring that out later.
Yeah,
you know?
I'm exactly the same way, and I think we're alike in that way. That a lot of our prep is just like reading books, watching movies, like just storing cool ideas in our head that we can then like pull out if it's like relevant. Like if the players do something that reminds me of something that happened in like 1982 Conan the Barbarian, like I can just extrapolate from that to like create something on the fly. I don't have to have like a whole binder full of notes.
What's up, Vince? Welcome. Yeah, you don't have to have a whole bunch of stuff, but that's one of the funny things too. Is I
Yeah,
think like I've talked about this before, and I talk about how like I watch a movie and I like that, or I read a book, like I was talking about the need there a second ago, and I'm like, oh, file that away. And people have accused me because I'm low to zero prep, like, well, that's still prep, and it's like, but I was gonna read the Aeneid anyways,
yeah,
you know,
exactly.
like I was gonna read that book anyways. I was watching that movie. Like I'm not trying to equate though, just to clarify this, just trying to equate me watching a movie and being inspired by that, and like you said, the mental Rolodex, like file that away,
Yeah.
that's entirely different than me sitting down for 2 hours and trying to plan out a dungeon,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. That stuff,
So,
yeah, like I said, that stuff we're doing anyway, the stuff we're doing for fun, and it inspires us for something else that we're doing for fun, which is running role playing games.
yeah. But, like in 0E, Gygax says some interesting stuff, like, I think in the Wilderness one, I always bring this up. He says, like on page 3 at the start, like before it is possible to conduct a campaign of adventures in the mazy dungeons, it is necessary for the referee to sit down with pencil in hand and draw these labyrinths on graph paper. Unquestionably, this will require a great deal of time and effort and imagination. The dungeon should look something like the example given below, with numerous levels, each sprawl in all directions, not necessarily stacked neatly above each other in a straight line. In the beginning, a dungeon is advisable to construct at least 3 levels at once. So like you're supposed to prep like 3 levels at a time, noting where stairs, traps, blah 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 blah. He goes on to say though, like your dungeon, like the assumption here is like a mega dungeon, right? Like your dungeon should be 12 levels, a
Yeah,
minimum. Like that's the minimum for a single dungeon, which I think is sort of something lost. I know like the one page dungeons are a big popular thing, and that's totally fine. I make those myself. I put them in my zine for other people, so I'm doing the prep for you. Um, where I make like a little one page dungeon. It has like a little bit of it's like one level. There's maybe some treasure and some monsters in there, a puzzle or something like that. Wham bam, thank you, ma'am, we're done. So, but there's something fun too with like prepping this labyrinth mega
Yeah.
dungeon that's ran by maybe some kind of evil demiurge and this sort of again mythical underworld concept, maybe, or maybe not. Maybe it doesn't have to. Maybe it can just be like a ruin or something. I get that that's fun. I do like Appendix A though too. So
Yeah. Well, you've always said, and that thing that you read from what was it, Gygax earlier, like it says, like not prepping is kind of like a more advanced skill, and that's stuff that I suck at that I still have to prep. Like I'm really terrible at thinking
mm,
of like interesting traps. Like if it's like beyond like a pit with spikes in it or like the ceiling coming down, I have like trouble coming up with some like really cool stuff. So if I know that they're going into a dungeon and I want like interesting traps in there, I actually have to prep these things. I have to go on, I have to like consult like books that I have. I have to go on Google or whatever, and like get like ideas and like all that stuff from like stuff that other people have done because I'm terrible at this. But then there's other aspects that I'm good at, so I don't have to prep those. So yeah,
yeah, and people are saying in the chat too. You should only prep. It's prep is fine, but you need to be ready. You can't be so like married to your prep too. You can't
yeah,
be like, they got to get to this next room in the dungeon because I put a lot of effort into that room, in its description, into the puzzle in it. And if they bypass it, like that's just a travesty. You have to be okay with they bypassed it.
yeah,
They didn't see it. So it was a waste of prep time. Maybe next time when I go to prep, I should just have a rough sketch. Like Gary talks about a lot about that. Like the prep that is done is very sketched out. I
yeah,
think it's kind of funny because what is it says? I think it says for ages 12 and up somewhere on here. It always made me laugh. Um, but I think Gary assumes, and there's Appendix N in here. I think he was kind of assuming, kind of like what we're doing, where uh you're kind of taking you're kind of taking things, and I've talked about this before. You have your toolbox of like media, right? Of films, books, video games, other comic books, whatever it is that you're into. You sort of have this toolbox in your head, and you're drawing from that. And you're able to, you're so familiar with that stuff because you're a big fan of. Because why else would you play this if you weren't a fan of
yeah,
that kind of stuff? If you didn't like Conan the Barbarian or you didn't like Lord of the Rings, why would you pick this up? You're so familiar with that stuff that you're able to sort of pick and choose like how you want it. Like, oh, there's a thieves guild in this town. I remember in Ilmet and Lankamar how the thieves guild operated there. Maybe I could do something like that. And there's like this evil.
yeah,
Maybe it's not a wizard that has like a humanoid rat familiar like in that story. Maybe it's something else. But like I can like riff on that and I can apply that to the game. You know,
yeah,
and you kind of have this rough outline sketch and you're so familiar with the content that you're able to apply it to it. Because I would say like to be a GM, it's not just in running games. You don't just need to know the rules. Like you should know the
yeah.
rules and you should be familiar with the system, but you also need to be familiar with the context that the rules are in what they're trying to simulate and what they're trying to create. If that
Hmm.
makes sense.